There's a building that shows up on almost every page of the Bible. Not always by name. Sometimes it's a garden. Sometimes it's a tent. Sometimes it's a mountain. Sometimes it's a city. But it's always the same idea, a place where heaven and earth overlap. Where God and humans share the same space. And if you miss this theme, you miss the spine of the entire biblical story. So why does a building matter so much? And what is it actually pointing to? To answer that, we have to go back further than Solomon. Further than Moses. All the way back to the first page. The opening chapters of Genesis describe something that most readers skip past. God creates the world in 6 days and on the seventh, he rests. Now in English, that sounds like God got tired. But in the ancient world, when a god rested in a temple, it meant something completely different. It meant the god had taken up residence. It meant the temple was now open for business. The whole cosmos, in other words, is presented in Genesis 1 as God's temple. Heaven and earth together, one vast space where God dwells with his creation. And right at the center of that cosmic temple, God plants a garden. The Garden of Eden is not just a nice park. It's a sanctuary. The place where God's presence is most concentrated, most accessible, most real. The imagery makes this unmistakable. The garden sits at the source of 4 rivers, which is precisely where ancient temples were located. The cherubim who guard its entrance in chapter 3 are the same creatures who will later guard the most sacred space in Israel's tabernacle and temple. Even the gold and precious stones mentioned in the garden narrative reappear, almost word for word, in the description of the temple's interior. The Garden of Eden is the first temple. And humans are placed inside it as priests, to tend it, to guard it, to extend its boundaries outward into the rest of creation. But then they are expelled. Driven out of the sanctuary. Cut off from the presence of God. And from that moment, the entire biblical story becomes a long answer to one question: how does humanity get back in? The next major moment comes in Exodus. Israel has been rescued from Egypt and God leads them into the wilderness. And almost immediately, God gives Moses an extraordinary set of instructions. A detailed blueprint for a portable sanctuary. A tent. The tabernacle. Now the details of the tabernacle are famously exhausting to read. Cubits and curtains and acacia wood and gold rings. Most people skip it. But here's what's happening beneath all those measurements. The tabernacle is built in 3 zones. An outer courtyard. An inner room called the Holy Place. And then the innermost room, the Holy of Holies, separated by a thick curtain. This is the place where God's presence dwells in concentrated form, above the Ark of the Covenant, between the golden cherubim. Sound familiar? It should. The same 3-zone structure echoes the geography of Eden. You move from the outer world, inward through increasing degrees of holiness, toward the inner sanctuary where God is present. The tabernacle is a portable Eden. A mobile temple. God's way of saying, I am coming to dwell with my people again, even in the wilderness. And when the tabernacle is complete and the glory of God fills it, Moses cannot even enter. The presence is too overwhelming. Heaven has touched earth again. The sanctuary is open. Centuries later, King David wants to build something permanent. A house for God. And his son Solomon gets to do it. The temple Solomon builds in Jerusalem is extraordinary. Gold everywhere. Intricate carvings of cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, imagery drawn directly from the Garden of Eden. The sea of cast bronze in the courtyard, the 12 bulls supporting it, the rivers of imagery flowing through every surface. It is a deliberate recreation of Eden. A statement that here, in this place, heaven and earth are one. And when the ark is brought in and Solomon prays and the glory of God descends and fills the temple, the priests cannot stand to minister. Again. Same thing as Moses. The presence is too dense, too real, too overwhelming. But here's where the story turns dark. Solomon, the man who built the most glorious temple for God, also builds shrines to foreign gods. Right there in Jerusalem. And from that point on, the temple becomes a barometer for the spiritual condition of the nation. When the kings are faithful, the temple is honored. When they are corrupt, the temple is plundered, desecrated, neglected. And then comes the moment that shatters everything. The prophet Ezekiel, writing just before the Babylonian invasion, has a vision. He watches the glory of God, the same glory that filled the tabernacle and the temple, slowly, agonizingly, lift off from the Holy of Holies. Move to the threshold. Pause. Move to the eastern gate. Pause. And then depart. God leaves his own temple. Before the Babylonians even arrive. And then the Babylonians arrive. And they burn it to the ground. And the people go into exile. And the question that hangs over the rest of the Old Testament is devastating: will God ever return? The prophets say yes. But they describe what's coming in terms so vast they barely sound like a building anymore. Isaiah sees a day when God's house will be a house of prayer for all nations, not just Israel. Ezekiel has a vision of a new temple so enormous it doesn't fit inside any city. A river flows from beneath it, growing deeper and wider as it goes, turning the desert into a garden and the Dead Sea into fresh water. Sound familiar? 4 rivers. A garden. Life flowing outward from the center. The prophets aren't just predicting a new building. They are describing a new Eden. The restoration of what was lost in Genesis 3. The reopening of the sanctuary. And then Jesus walks into the temple. He doesn't come to admire it. He overturns the tables. He quotes Isaiah and Jeremiah and declares that the temple has become a den of robbers, it has failed its purpose. And then he says something that gets him killed. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The religious leaders think he's talking about the building. John tells us he was talking about his body. This is the center of the whole theme. Jesus is the new temple. He is the place where heaven and earth fully, perfectly, bodily overlap. The presence that once filled the Holy of Holies now walks around in sandals, eating fish, touching lepers, entering the homes of sinners. When Jesus dies, the curtain of the temple tears in two. From top to bottom. The barrier between the Holy of Holies and the outside world, gone. The way back into the sanctuary, the way back to the presence of God, ripped open from the inside. And when Jesus rises, the new temple is inaugurated. God's presence is no longer contained in a building in Jerusalem. It's alive, embodied, risen, and about to be sent out into the world. This is why Paul can write to a scattered group of ordinary people in Corinth, a port city full of idol temples, and tell them, "You are the temple of the Holy Spirit." Not a metaphor he throws around lightly. He means it with the full weight of everything we've just traced. The glory that filled the tabernacle. The presence that overwhelmed Moses and the priests. That is now dwelling inside ordinary human beings. The church, the community of Jesus' followers, is the new temple. Distributed. Mobile. Expanding. Just like the priests in Eden were supposed to extend the sanctuary outward into the world, the church carries the presence of God into every corner of creation. But even this is not the end. The book of Revelation describes the final destination of the whole story. John sees the new Jerusalem descending from heaven to earth. He looks for the temple inside it. And there is none. No temple. Because the entire city is the temple. God and his people finally sharing the same space, not through a curtain, not through a priest, not through a building, but face to face. Fully. Finally. Forever. The garden is restored. The sanctuary is open. And this time, nothing will ever drive anyone out. That is what the temple was always pointing to. Not a building. A reunion.